Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today we're headed to the Battle of Chickamauga, Georgia on September 20th, 1863, the third and final day of the fight, zooming into the confusion and chaos of ground littered with carnage and debris, in between drifts of battle smoke and the sounds of rebel yells and Yankee huzzas, zipping bullets and whizzing shells. We find the men and officers of the 23rd Tennessee Infantry, 1,000 strong at the start of the war, and today depleted to about 108 souls. Effective men, still full of fight, rolling over its opposition. They engaged in the day's most intense fighting in the afternoon. Quote, the firing was heavy, and the enemy's massive columns were hurling against our wearied heroes, end quote. That comes from the 23rd's Brigade Commander, Colonel John S. Fulton, in his after-action report. Fulton continued in his flowery prose, quote, the battle raged furiously, and the tide of success wavered in the balance. Charge after charge was repulsed, only to rally and charge again. Again, our line fell back, and the untiring, indomitable, and determined officers rallied again, their fast thinning ranks, and again moved forward. Here, officers and men behaved most gallantly. Appeals to love of home and wounded comrades and the peril of the moment were made, and never did men rush forward more eager, daring, desperate, and defiant. The enemy's treble lines now began to show that our fire was terribly effective upon them, end quote. When it was all over, the Tennesseans drove the Federals from the field, but they suffered many wounded during the day, including the officer pictured here, First Lieutenant Hugh Garvin Gwyn, the regimental adjutant of the 23rd. The exact nature of Hugh's injury was not specified, but his superiors mentioned him in reports for his conduct, his superior conduct on the battlefield that day. Hugh hailed from a family of divided loyalties. An older brother, James, he's pictured here, was commissioned captain of the 23rd Pennsylvania Infantry. That was in April of 1861, and later became colonel of the 118th Pennsylvania Infantry. James was wounded in two 1864 battles in Virginia, the Wilderness and Peebles Farm. He earned a Brigadier General of Volunteers brevet for the latter battle, and in 1865 earned a Major General of Volunteers brevet for gallantry at another battle, Five Forks. Both Hugh and Gwyn were two of 15 children born in Londonderry, Ireland, sons of Ireland, to Alexander Gwyn and his wife, Catherine Garvin. Alexander died young, leaving Catherine a widow with her brood of children. According to one story, published in Confederate Veteran magazine, her health was failing, and doctors suggested a sea cruise to take in the fresh air and restore her health. So she and her children, including James and Hugh, and all their household belongings were packed into a chartered vessel for America. They arrived in 1850 when Hugh was 12 and made their way to Kentucky. And there they found a home in Louisville and Munfordville. The Confederate veteran story noted, while yet a minor, Hugh joined a force of railway engineers operating in southern Kentucky and northern Tennessee, and then became a soldier of the Confederacy. Hugh's first military experience took place in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It was there in October of 1861 that the 23rd relocated after its organization for state service. Over the next 2 years, the regiment participated in key battles in the region, including Perryville, Shiloh, Murfreesboro, Stones River, and Chickamauga. In mid-1862, the War Department officially assigned Hugh as adjutant and first lieutenant of the 23rd Tennessee. The regiment was consolidated with the 17th Tennessee Infantry a year later. Hugh was retained as the adjutant and served in this capacity at Chickamauga. In January 1864, he requested a transfer to the staff of Brigadier General John Hunt Morgan. You students of the Civil War know that Morgan fought in the Mexican War and later became a businessman in Lexington, Kentucky. In 1857, he raised the Lexington Rifles, a militia unit. After the start of the war, he became a captain and commanded a squadron of cavalry scouts. In 1862, he launched a series of 3 successful raids, which caused much loss in Union men and materials and earned him a promotion to brigadier. A 4th raid in Ohio in July of 1863 resulted in his capture. He escaped from the Ohio State Penitentiary in November 1863, and then about a year later, he was surprised and killed by federal forces in Greenville, Tennessee. Now, Hugh wrote a letter to Morgan requesting a transfer. This was in earlier, before all of the action with Morgan. In that letter, he explained that a gunshot wound to his right hand made it difficult for him to perform his duties. The incident that caused his wound is unknown, and the dates and nature of his service under Morgan are unclear. According to one account, Hugh aided Morgan in a reorganization of his command and served on his staff until the general's death in September of 1864. Hugh went on to join the staff of Morgan's successor, Brigadier General Basil Duke, as Inspector General. In the waning days of the war, Duke obtained a promotion for Hugh to major for his, quote, inestimable assistance, end quote. In the summer of 1865, with the war still fresh in his mind, Hugh reflected on his military service. He wrote to friends, quote, "It was gratifying to me after going home, and not only to me, but my sisters, that I had remained true to the last," end quote. Notice he didn't mention his brother. Another writer described Hugh in this way, quote, "At the end of the war, Major Gwyn turned his natural energy to the arts of peace, and he's made as good a citizen as he was a soldier," end quote. Hugh married and migrated west. In 1870, he lived in Mississippi. A decade later, in 1880, he was in Nashville, Tennessee, where he worked as a railroad supply agent. During this time, his marriage dissolved. He moved to San Diego, California in 1887. His employment included a partnership in the insurance business with a brother-in-law and as postmaster of the San Diego suburb of Coronado. He formed the John Hunt Morgan Camp of the United Confederate Veterans and was very active in the organization. He remarried at age 81 in 1921. The marriage ended after his wife's death 2 years later. Hugh died at the home of his sister in 1925 from shock and heart failure after refusing surgery to clear an intestinal obstruction. He objected to the operation on the grounds of his Christian Scientist beliefs. A son from his first marriage survived him. Hugh outlived his brother, Brevet Major General James Gwyn, who had died in 1906. I found no evidence that the two brothers communicated with each other after the war. A fellow veteran remembered Hugh as the kind of man who led, quote, "a life full of helpfulness to others. His unselfish, fearless spirit incited others to do likewise, and he became the center of innumerable, ever-widening waves of action, so that thousands have been encouraged and aided by his splendid spirit. Therefore, his life is immortal, for he never will be forgotten," end quote. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.